Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Dawna Daigneault is the lead author of Understanding Self-Worth, a guide to worth-conscious theory and psychotherapeutic practice. Her work focuses on helping people recognize patterns of denied self-worth and understand how those patterns shape the way they think, feel, and relate to others. Her work offers a thoughtful and practical perspective that helps people better understand themselves while also giving them language for experiences they may not have been able to name before. She is also currently developing the Worth Conscious app based on the book's material, which invites users to reflect on how they question their worth and use guided journaling to capture insights they can carry into conversations with their therapist. Well, Dawna, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi.
I hope you're feeling well and that life is treating you well.
Yes. Yes to both.
So I'm hoping you can fill us in on what brought you to write a book like this and what you're hoping. Is this the beginning of something or the ending of something? Just tell us about the Worth Consciousness Theory book.
So I have thought about worth and specifically self-worth my whole adult life. And I would say it originates in a childhood where I felt both worthy and unworthy at times. So I knew the distinct difference in how, like I had a biological father who was absent, so how that made me feel versus, having adults in my life who were not only present, but were attentive and nurturing and how the difference between those two experiences. And as I got into adulthood and got into counseling, I fell in love with transactional analysis. You probably see a little bit of that
I do indeed.
in the book. Yeah. And this concept of I'm okay, you're okay. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And there are some people that believe the I'm not okay comes first, and some people that believe that I'm okay comes first. And then as I started working with clients and seeing that distinct difference, I was like, is there something maybe more beneficial? I love okayness, and I think it's a nice neutral place to land. But when I look at what we're conscious of, and especially how many self-conscious people or people who've been suffering from self-consciousness at certain different levels, how they come in and they're coming in self-conscious, and I'm offering them not self-conscious. The okayness is kind of not that. It just seemed kind of unattractive to some of my clients. And then I started looking this way. I was like, well, what's over here? If there was something that felt more rooted and grounded and even wonderful, but more than okayness, what is it? And I thought, well, what if it's honoring our human worth? And I do have lots of clients from different religious backgrounds, and some of them, have come in with the notion of, well, worth is God-given. And yet, even in their family systems, there are still conditions on this thing that's supposed to be, given from
God-given,
a higher
freely
power.
given.
Yeah. And that actually created for a number of my clients even more confusion. And so it really got me to thinking, why don't we think we can give worth to each other? If we can give okayness to each other, and again, Eric Berne was a genius, in my opinion. So I don't pretend to be at that level. But, I was like, "Oh, if we can have okayness and all agree that okayness is a desirable place to land. Like, why don't we, as a community, as a group consciousness, like decide that being conscious of our worth is available and like even a part of a wellness practice? So I did start looking at all the different definitions of self-worth. You'll see in the book that, yeah, I looked at Rogers. I remembered Rogers talked about unconditional positive regard. He talked about conditions on worth. They went right back to his books and looked for his underpinnings of that. Maslow references things, and not necessarily about worth, but about values. And he had these being values. He called them the B values. We talk about that in the book. I loved Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I read that several times, and the message in that book is, if you exist, you matter.
Right.
And yeah, I when I went and looked at what was the existential movement trying to create, because it wasn't just existential psychology, there was the whole existential philosophy. And it's like, why did that develop, and what was that movement about? And they were trying to help us as a human race not repeat an atrocity. They were trying to help us not only find individual meaning in our existence, but also to not strip someone else of their right to exist. And that's powerful to me. And I feel like self-worth is my individual experiencing of a collective, the collection of human worth, that it's available all the time. We just forget to honor it in each other.
Absolutely. There's a teaching that says we give this moment all the meaning it has for us, right? We create our own meaning. And so if we create a meaning that leaves us feeling worthless, we could try again, because it's malleable. We can change it if we know what we're doing.
Yes.
And a big part of that knowing what we're doing is being aware of how thoroughly we've been conditioned.
That's the hard part. Because, one of the things I wanted to differentiate was, going back to Eric Burns' work, that he had these 12 injunctions. And I know he borrowed those from the Golding's work, but I learned it from transactional analysis literature. And these 12 injunctions are really heavy. I mean, one of them is, don't be you, don't grow up. There are these heavy parental injunctions. And I looked at that and I said, my clients that are more severely traumatized have some of those. But my clients who are conditioned and just not seen, they don't have that level of injunction, but they had injunctions. So splitting those up and saying there are abusive injunctions, and then there are just intrusive injunctions that still create conditions. And sometimes the condition is desirable, like grow up and be a good mother. And when that woman grows up and she's as good of a mom as she can be, and then her kids are all gone, she can't work for worth anymore. And so her worth wasn't rooted in a birthright, it was in this condition.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
In the role or the purpose that someone's given, right?
Yeah. And so there's meaning in that, and yet it doesn't reinforce worth as a birthright. And so it can
Or
get,
it keeps you, because it doesn't reinforce the worth as a birthright, it keeps you in this very precarious position that you're always asking or being asked, "What have I done for you?" or "What have you done for me lately?"
perfect. It's working for worth. And so many of my clients, the conditions in their family system or in even community systems have these requirements of, how are you working for your worth? How are you earning your worth? And I think that's a dangerous proposal.
I think the biggest, when you say dangerous, the biggest danger for me in that is because it blinds us to the actual worth that's always there.
Yeah. And then people come into therapy and, a client will sit with me and I can tell they don't feel worthy. but I know that they don't know me yet. I'm a stranger, so I'm going to give them some time to get to know my style and to feel the safety in the room. And then when they let me kind of see behind the story, so they have a front-facing self, or some people call it a mask, and then they have the backstory, or the thing they don't want everybody to know. And so when they let me into that backstory and I see all the evidence of denied self-worth that they've collected over decades of living, and they can name them all for me. I wasn't good enough this way. I didn't say the right things. I upset this person. I wanted to be a dancer, but I was told that I wasn't, coordinated enough. And then I tried singing, and then my boyfriend broke up with me. And you start hearing all of this accumulation of evidence that they decided denies their self-worth. And so therefore they must not be worthy. And the ability of human beings to decide we are unworthy it's just such an ugly reality we can create for ourselves, and then unfortunately our families can contribute to that. We call it a lost worth story, and yet I don't believe worth can actually be lost.
Right. So that's why the story word is so important in that phrase.
Yes, lost worth story. But I will listen to all the evidence, and that's really important that we do, that we take all of that in. And then we start helping the person look at, well, if your worth hadn't been denied in that moment, if it had been affirmed instead, how would have that gone differently? How would that conversation have gone differently?
That's huge.
Yeah.
And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the similarities between what I've read so far in your book about worth consciousness theory and the book Bruised Not Broken by Christine Jensen that I recently did an interview with, where the subtitle there is, I think it's Healing the Shame of a Troubled Childhood.
Mm.
And so when I'm reading your book about worth and worth consciousness and birthright kind of worth, etc., realized self-worth, etc., I keep feeling like there's a parallel between the worth or lack of worth and the shame.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't know if you would separate those two, but as it sits with me today, they're pretty much equatable terms.
I think they've become more knotted up together. But when I was looking at shame and wanting to understand it, I was looking for the earliest evidence of it. And what I found was a reference to Mesopotamia, and that they believed that shame worked in early civilizations as a social regulator, like a behavior regulator, which of course we look at, oh, if we're going to all share space, let's not kill each other when we get upset. Let's not steal each other's goats or wives. Like there, a set of rules were established to allow us to be more civilized. And so shame was useful for quite a long time. And I think this is back in, we talk about Julian Jaynes' concept of groupthink before he believed human beings didn't have the consciousness we have now for thousands of years. And that in this going from groupthink mode to independent thinking mode, we had several steps that we had to take. And so when we look at the origination of shame, it was meant to control behavior that was probably deadly or very harmful. But what I believe or see that it has morphed into is an isolating, humiliating, and deeply individual pain point that you suffer alone, even in your own family system where you would hope you get support. Shame can be used to make one person feel worse than everybody else in the system. And sometimes it's designed to do that.
Right, which is a mystery to me about how anybody ever thought that would be useful for productive or loving human development, right?
Right.
I've heard
Yeah.
stories of cultures where in their in indigenous cultures, they've got traditions like, when, a woman becomes pregnant, she goes off and meditates, and she hears the song of the child, and she comes back and teaches that song to the tribe, and then, eh, throughout that person's life, all the major events in their life, coming of age for this or that, the tribe gets together and sings their song to them. The only
Mm.
other time that happens is if they step out of bounds and they've offended somebody, and the tribe gets around and puts them in the middle and sings their song to them, which is just a instead of a shame on you, it's a remember your worth,
Ah, I haven't heard that.
right? So, I mean, it's to me, it seems like a much more potentially positive solution for living together cooperatively than shame, right? Reminding
Yes.
someone of their worth, I would think, would be highly preferable to a decent outcome or positive outcome as opposed to trying to shame somebody into changing their behavior.
Yeah. Yes. And yet we know shame has been used for thousands of years. It's been used to control and condemn. And unfortunately, we've gotten good at it as human beings because we can do it to ourselves. In my own head, one part of my mind can shame another part of me.
Absolutely. So, when you are working with somebody who has really low self-worth from whatever its origins, what are some of the general approaches or specific things you do to help them make a shift to realize that their thoughts about themselves as negative are false?
What I've learned to do, because I've been in private practice for just over 20 years now, and I didn't know how to do this at first, and it slowly occurred to me as I was reading more about self-worth and really wanting to always honor it. That became a goal of mine, is that the way I hold space for people invites their worth to be seen and be available, and it's not lip service. And so I'm listening for how they make moves against their own worth and how they affirm theirs or other people's worth. One client that was the most resistant to any worth affirming responses from me, like, this is me kind of catching this person say something that's worth affirming. I would say, hey, that sounds like that you believe that person has worth, just the way that you interacted with them. "Oh, yeah, 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 I believe that." And then I say, "So, would you move against that person's worth as a human being or as a friend?" "Oh, no, no, no." I'm like, "So you know not to do that, and yet when you and I talk about you, you move against your own self-worth pretty consistently, like, daily." And this guy was like, "I know, and I know." He's like, "I know where it comes from." He said, "I can't get my mom out of my head." Right? And that there was a voice in his head, and it came from childhood, and it was critical. It was telling him what made him wrong, bad, foolish, ridiculous. It was pretty heavy criticism. And I did not yet have enough power to counter someone from his childhood that had the most positional power in the family. Why would anything I say have power he needed to have the first 50 years of his life, right? We needed to go back in time and give him the power that we were talking about in
Or
therapy.
or help him give it to himself, right? One of the ways we've been
Yes.
talking about it lately is if you've got this first 6 or 7 years of your development where you're just wide open like a radar dish, right? And you're just sucking up everything. And some people say the first 7 years of your life, you're living in a state of self-hypnosis. You don't even realize it, but you're taking in so much stuff, and the billions of neurons in the brains are still growing and making connections. And then there comes a part in our brain development where there's a shift. And instead of producing new neurons and all kinds of new connections, our brain starts pruning off the stuff we're not using.
Mm.
And if you think about that as there was this window of time during which a child can take in from the outside self-worth, love, self-respect, whatever you want to call it, good self-image. But when that window closes, they can no longer take it in from the outside.
Mm.
The good news is they can always give it to themselves, right? Because if we start out earlier saying, that there's a teaching that says, I give this moment all the meaning it has for me. So I can create a meaning for whatever happened in the past that I'm carrying along with me that I say leads to my thinking I'm not worthy. Or I can go back and change the meaning that I'm carrying right now that I downloaded from back then, and I can change what I'm thinking
Yes.
and
Yeah.
actually
And
have the healing happen.
yes. And what I would add is that um, as I was listening to clients and learning what would make the difference, it was that worth and truth need to be congruent. And that somewhere along the way, his truth was unacceptable in his family of origin. So he learned to water it down, to not display it, to not engage in it, to get conditional worth,
Right.
right? And so then he hates himself because he participated in
Or giving himself
a
up.
delusion.
Giving himself up, right? He hates
Mhm.
himself because
Yes.
he didn't stay true to himself.
Yeah. Yeah. And he diluted his truth to remain acceptable in a system that didn't know how to give unconditional worth. So we pair truth and worth together in the work with clients where we look for what do you believe? And the first thing I'm looking for in a more severe case is do they believe in human worth? I've got to have a base.
I used to give an exercise to people that said, one of the options they could put on their list of statements is, I'm a good person and I deserve to be treated with respect. And I got away with that for years. And then I finally had a woman say to me, I don't believe that. I said, you don't believe what? I don't believe I'm a good person. I said, okay. So I gave it a week to think about it. And when she came in the next time, I said, how about this? I'm a human being and I deserve to be treated with respect. Do you admit,
Yeah.
do you agree? Do you feel like you're a human being? Oh, yes. And then we had Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City. And I said, here's a person who did this and is getting 3 meals a day and has been transferred to different jails to avoid abuse and is getting a fair trial. And so have you done something worse than that? Oh, no. I said, okay, well, then you deserve to be treated with respect.
Nice.
But you have to work with what that person's holding on
Yes.
to and help
Yes.
them step into something that they feel the truth of
Yeah.
within
Yes.
themselves.
The interesting thing, and hopefully this won't change in the future, but doing this for as long as I have, talking about worth is when I listen for what level of worthiness they can attach to or believe in or trust. Um, if they don't believe it exists within themselves, every time when I mention a child, a sibling, a best friend, sometimes a parent or a grandparent, and I say, "Do they have worth?" The answer is yes. And that's the end. That's where we start with, "Tell me what they're worth. Why do you know they have worth? Tell me how you
Where does
define
it
that."
come from? Right, exactly.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the flat earther syndrome, right? Same argument. Hey,
Okay.
it says our Earth is flat. Okay, but what about the moon? What about the sun? What about that star? What about this other planet? What about that other planet? Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
they're all around. Okay, well then, if everybody else has worth, I might have worth too. Do you are you old enough to remember the movie The Point?
Remind me what it's
There's
about.
a little animated movie based around a story about Oblio, and he was born in the land of Point.
I don't know this.
By the way, the land of Point, everyone and everything has a point. So people are born with a point at the top of their head, and trees
Mm,
have points, and buildings have points, but Oblio was born without a point. And so his mother knitted him a cap, pointed cap, with which to conceal his pointless condition. So Oblio runs afoul of the evil count's son by beating him in a game of ring and toss, and gets banished to the pointless forest. So Oblio and his dog Arrow go as a little boy and his dog to the pointless forest, banished forever, where they discover that everything in the pointless forest has a point. The leaves have points, all the trees have points. So they end up coming back to the land of point and saying, hey, we figured that if everyone's got a point, I must have one too. So
I love that.
yeah, and it features the music of Harry Nilsson. So it's lovely music, fun, bouncy, and it was an animated, made for television movie. You can probably find it on YouTube. But this is what you're doing with people. You're trying to help them see, listen, if everyone I ask you about, you say, oh yeah, they have worth and they have worth and they have worth. Aren't you a human too?
Yeah. Yeah. And so then it just, the work then shifts to how much change can they tolerate, even though it's wellness oriented, because feeling worthy can inform so much of our sense of self. And yet the pattern of denied self-worth that they've had, again, sometimes 3-4 decades before I meet with them, that's their familiarity, that's their known world. And so I don't care to introduce change that would make them alter 50% of themselves. I think that's cruel. I don't think it's tolerated well. I think 10% change is scary, or at least that's what I've seen in the people I've worked with. And so we do the increments that make them feel safe and still make them feel like them. So, I mean, a lot of the defenses they've developed, living this life of having denied self-worth, wondering if they're worthy, but being afraid that they aren't, like lots of defenses get developed, and those feel like armor. And so sometimes I'm wanting them to be vulnerable and take off a piece of their armor, and they're like, oh, no, 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 I never take that off. Like, and I think I said this to you when we had a chat before.
And when you're talking about the armor, there's so much that all the great practical spiritual teachings talk to us about how we can't get where we want to go protected with our armor on, right?
Yeah.
And that the essence of us is something that doesn't need protecting and only works well and grows and flowers when it's wide open and breathing and there's the exchange of energies.
Yes. I remember I said that some of the things I work with clients on in the office, like removing a piece of armor, I've had a few people say, but I have to put it on when I leave here, or I can't remain this vulnerable outside of this safe space. And so then we talk about that, right? We talk about, is there anybody out in your day-to-day life that is safe enough to practice this worth to worth exchange with? I see your worth, and I'm going to let you see my worth. I see your truth, and I'm going to let you see my truth at a tolerable level.
Yeah, and that's, the essence of meeting a person where they are, right? And what you're talking about is my idea of how somebody should be and live their life has almost no relevance to what's going to be good for them, right? They have to grow into what's going to be good for them. They can't just try and remake their life based on some theory I read in a book.
Yes. I don't want to replace the conditions they grew up with now conditions of this model or that model. I want to say, hey, if you're interested in affirming your worth and honoring human worth and developing self-worth, that looks a certain way, but we're going to tailor it to your truth and who you are and who you need to be. And even who they are right now in my office is worthy. Even though they have a pattern of denied self-worth, that doesn't take away their birthright.
Yeah, the birthright is there. Can't ever be chipped, dented, rusted, faded, or broken in any way. So,
Yes.
if you can learn to let life happen and then come back into that awareness of that birthright self-worth, that's you'll start to see your life change in positive ways.
Yes. Yeah.
So, do you do a lot of work individually still? Are you working online and virtually? Or what's your work life like these days? What kind of population are you serving aside from writing a wonderful book like this?
I have a full-time private practice. My clients are adults. I've been doing that for a little over 20 years, and it informed the book. All of that work informed the book, plus all of the research. And then I realized that I can't see all the people who want to help people repair their self-worth. And so the book became a way to let other clinicians know how to do what was working with my people. And it's just been beautiful. I've had a somewhat diverse population. I'm in the Midwest, so it's not the most diverse population, but as people have done word of mouth with the type of work I do, it's the most beautiful thing is somebody who shows up that maybe wouldn't have shown up in my practice. That I'm of a certain age and of a certain race and sex, and so I think when people found out, oh, she'll help me with my self-worth stuff, they were willing to give me a chance. So I got to work with some diverse people, and their stories added to the richness of this theory. And I was so grateful to meet and work with people that have a little bit different cultural background or a different personal history where their worth was denied in ways that were to the left or right of what I had experienced so far personally and professionally. And so I really wanted this to be something that spoke to any client that came in, because if birthright self-worth is available to everyone, repairing it should be available to everyone.
Wonderful thought. Right? And everything we can do to help make that happen is,
Yeah.
is worth the effort, right?
Yeah. I haven't met a person that I wouldn't include in having human worth. I haven't met that person. And I've met some really unhappy people in my professional life. I've met some people with deep pain points. And when they recover their sense of worthiness, even the most basic level, and then we practice honoring it every session. You just let's co-create this together, because I believe that's the first place it happens. When we're born, we don't know our truth and we don't know we're worthy. But our brain knows when our tummy is rumbling because it's empty. And so the first thing that wires is our tummy rumbles, and our brain recognizes that signal, and then it signals our mouth to make a noise. And then if we're lucky, there's a nurturing person nearby that cares to attend to that signal. And so in attachment theory, we know that we're wiring between us and the caregiver, but we're also wiring internally self-trust. I trust my brain to recognize my signals and to signal the world, and then the world responds. And so when I look at the first year of life in Erickson's psychosocial model, trust versus mistrust, there's a lot more that we're trusting there. There's a lot more trust building that's happening, including it could have self-worth being affirmed. We talk about Maslow's life needs, that's the bottle, to quell the hunger in the tummy.
Right.
But how the bottle is delivered is the self-worth need.
Right.
that nurturing component, that we matter to be fed, that it matters to figure out which cry is happening now. It's not always a hunger cry. Sometimes it's a love cry or a tired cry or I need to be changed cry. And so
My
what
diaper
we
pin
talk
is sticking me cry.
yeah. So what we look at is as we come to know ourselves and trust what's internally signaled that's true for us and that matters to somebody else, what we learn is that what's true for us matters and then it's made worthy. And then over each of those developmental stages, we learn a little bit more about ourselves and a little bit more truth about me shows up. Do I remain worthy in age 2, 3, 4? Do I remain worthy as I'm developing truth in age 5, 6, 7? You know, in each developmental stage, as I'm becoming me and learning what's true for me, do I still remain worthy in that system? And things change for people at different stages in development. There's unfortunately a point in time for many of my clients, and it's different points in those developmental stages where they're like, oh, yeah, I don't know. My mom stopped liking me when I was 12.
I've had a lot of people over the years when puberty hits, the parent of the opposite sex all of a sudden is hands off, and
Yeah.
yeah, and it's incomprehensible for the child to
Hmm.
to put that together and figure out what's going on, why is this happening? So what they almost always do is download a belief there's something wrong with me.
Yes. Must be me.
And when you download that belief, I don't know, have you heard about the memory reconsolidation work and coherence therapy? And
I've heard a little bit about coherence therapy, and I actually listened to one of your podcasts and you mentioned it.
well, coherence therapy basically is a non-pathologizing approach. You can call it a foundational underpinning or an overarching theory about things. So it
Okay.
isn't a specific way of doing therapy other than it is it's what developed out of Bruce Ecker and Laurel Hulley, his wife, and their research trying to figure out all of the years that they were doing therapy, marriage and family therapists, and what was working when they had somebody have a really significant shift that stayed, right? It took. And as they moved forward in life, that that shift maintained. And what they found was that when I have a felt sense within me of this truth, whenever it's out here and active, everything about my worldview in that moment is makes sense of that view. And I can have an infinite number of other worldviews back here that conflict with this, but only one of them can stay conscious at a time. And if one that has some information, like this one is that I'm worthless. I'm a bag of scum and nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. Think I'll go eat worms, right? And that's out here. It's full. I'm living my life this way. And all of a sudden, oh, I did a good job. I'm not so bad. Now I'm not horrible scum, but that worldview is still back here. And when it gets active, I feel the truth of it, right? So the memory reconsolidation piece is this deeply experiential process, however you want to get there, where you help the person go back and remember this deep truth about their lack of worth or whatever. And then you help them step into another life event where they actually felt their truth and then
Mhm.
go into that experientially and leave the other one alone for a minute. And then quickly jump back to this one and let that full set of the felt sense of the truth of that. If I just keep flipping back and forth between these deeply true felt senses, which are opposing, my
Yeah.
mind will make sense of it.
Mm, that's lovely.
That's the memory reconsolidation piece, a quick summary. And the idea, the research on it says it was somewhere in the 1990s that they started to realize that, you know what, this thing about once you're traumatized, always traumatized, or anything that changes in the brain stays stuck in that way, or the brain mapping that says one location in the brain is responsible for one activity, that's all wrong.
Ah,
And not only that, but they had research that says if you go back and access a deeply troubling memory and leave it at this experiential level, you open up a window. I think they said in the original work, it was about a 5-hour window, during which time you can do this memory reconsolidation business and effectively rewrite the meaning of that memory. The memories can stay the same, but instead of it meaning that I'm a worthless piece of scum, I grow into the awareness that, oh, my mother was 24 years old and stressed out of her mind, and my dad was an alcoholic, and this wasn't about me. And when
Mhm.
I do that, then my brain, instead of doing this with these two felt senses of reality, goes, oh, here's a way to make sense of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do a really modified version of that. I borrowed from acceptance and commitment theory, the choice point model. I saw usefulness of using it in a limited way, just around worth. And so you have the moment of choice. In our book, we call it the conscious moment technique. So you have this moment of choice, and from that moment, you can go towards self consciousness, which is the familiar path. I call it the 6-lane superhighway. It's easy to get on, and then you go all the way to the end, or a worth conscious choice. But there isn't this mental, emotional muscle built around being worth conscious. I don't know why. And as an aside, I want to say that's what breaks my heart the most in our world is the more I talked about this and made this available to people, I say, why aren't we learning this in kindergarten to be worth conscious? Like, why aren't we doing this as a whole community of humans that we honor worth in each other just as a routine fact? And we just be I would be out of a job probably, but it's okay.
Yeah, in
Right?
a lovely
Like,
way. You'll find something else to do. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be so beneficial. Yeah.
Wonderful and lovely. And my brain was going 5 other directions as you were talking, but I realized that we're just about out of time. So
Mm.
if you would get centered and take a breath and settle in and think about, okay, so talked about some things already. Is there one of those things we've already talked about you want to go back and highlight, or something we haven't mentioned yet that you want to put in this interview?
There is so much. Do you have a question? Is there a
No,
point of
I was
interest?
just going to say I'm just so grateful that you and people like you are out there doing this work and putting the book together. I think it's a real good tool for therapists to get stirred up again some of the old questions and thoughts and to see some of the connections between the different theories and models that have come out. And again, as it's coming from you and your experience doing therapy, you know this works, right? So you're just sharing with people what you have found really works. And that's just
Yes,
that's a gift.
yes. I've had a client for about 10 years who had a CPTSD because this person's childhood was really rough. And I didn't get DBT trained, and I knew uh, fairly early when the trauma started surfacing, I needed to help this individual get some DBT under their belt. And so I was like, hey, let's get you over to this group that's doing DBT skills. And this client was like, are you getting rid of me? And I said, no, you can come back. You can stay with me. You can come back anytime you want. What do you need to do? And the answer was, okay, as long as you're not getting rid of me, I'll go do this thing. I said, I just want you to go get these DBT skills because I'm not trained in that. And I believe that's going to be very helpful to you. So they go, they come back. And then some major life events help in the next hit in the next 3 years. Major hit after hit after hit. That's really disruptive to this person's nervous system. And when a person can't self regulate, I'm not going to do the worth work with them. Okay. And we talk about that in chapter 8, like that window of tolerance and helping a person, be within it and be able to self regulate because self worth and denied self worth triggers people, right? But what I decided to do, even though this person felt like they were going backwards more than they were going forwards, is every time they came into session and they say, I'm repeating everything again and I'm not making progress, I would say, And it's okay. You tell me what you need from me. It's okay if we do the same thing every time you come in here, as long as that's okay with you. And the worth being in that session and not making progress became the thing. Me not needing this person to move differently, me not needing to see evidence of my skill, but just letting this person show up and vent and cry and talk. And then we would get regulated by the end of the session. And this went on for a while. And then a change happened, a really amazing, profound, I'm holding on to myself better. But I honestly believe it took being worth somebody's time, session after session after session of
Even though
meltdowns.
even though they weren't performing like a good client, right, or a good patient
Uh-huh.
would.
Yeah,
"Hey, I'm a really good therapist. You should be better already.
yeah. And
These are my best tools."
yeah, and I couldn't even use my best tools in some of those sessions. It wasn't the right move to make. I needed to just be present with this person and say, I see you and you matter. And this pain is real and it matters. And this is your truth right now. And truth and worth belong together.
Yeah, and it's lovely that you were able to just see that, "Okay, wait a minute. If I join this is another part of the coherence therapy model,
Is it?
right? Well, another part of the coherence therapy model is that most therapy is built around an anti-symptom position. I
Mm,
have this problem. I spend too much money and then I go into debt and I have to work for a long time to get out of debt. And then I got that problem of spending. Okay. So most therapies would be focused on helping this person regulate their spending. The coherence therapy model says we don't want to talk about how bad it is to spend money you don't have and why you might do that. We want to know why it's so important for you to keep spending money, even though you know there's not money in the account. And when you go into the pro-symptom position, that's when you start discovering, oh, this is what I need to see to be able to find a different way to meet these needs, and shift over into the worth consciousness pathway of neural firings rather than the old path. Oh, okay.
yeah,
Well, I
nice.
realize that we're out of time and I got to run because somebody's in the waiting room already, but I thank you greatly for being willing to share the book with us and this interview time. How do you prefer people reach out to you?
They can find me and my co-author at understandingselfworth.com, and it's self-worth, understandingselfworth.com. The book is there. A link to our Facebook group is there, and there are other free resources there.
Excellent. And of course, all of that material and information will be in the notes for this episode. So thank you so much for the work you're doing and for sharing it with us. It's been a blessing.
Well, thank you so much.
Dawna Daigneault is the lead author of Understanding Self-Worth, a guide to worth-conscious theory and psychotherapeutic practice. Her work focuses on helping people recognize patterns of denied self-worth and understand how those patterns shape the way they think, feel, and relate to others. Her work offers a thoughtful and practical perspective that helps people better understand themselves while also giving them language for experiences they may not have been able to name before. She is also currently developing the Worth Conscious app based on the book's material, which invites users to reflect on how they question their worth and use guided journaling to capture insights they can carry into conversations with their therapist.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.